The time is 6:30. I'm calling the Blount County Board of Commissioners Agenda Committee meeting to order. At this time, please do the emergency announcement.
Before we get started, let me read the emergency evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency evacuation, an alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by way of the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you've reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Please be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles.
Modern technology. Apparently they didn't like how I read it last month. At this time, please register your attendance by signifying yes. Mr. Harrison.
Okay, you have 19 present, 2 absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will take public input of items on the agenda. Anybody wishing to speak to items on the agenda? Mr. Gentleman in the green shirt, please come forward. State your name and the commission district.
Joe Manning, I'm from Alcoa.
Let me get you turned on, sir.
I'm Joe Manning. I am from Alcoa. I am concerned about this wheel tax that you're wanting to impose on the county. My concern is that we are already taxed more than what we should be. We, as a public, only have so much money coming in to take care of ourselves. So the county needs to tighten their budget or their pocketbook strings and quit hollering, give me, and taxing us citizens more and more every time we turn around. Now, from what I read in the paper, maybe this is not the time for me to bring it up. It looked like you're dangling a carrot in front of us for the wheel tax or the 38.5 cent property tax. I don't think that we need either. I think we need to tighten our belt and live like the people in the community have to live, within our means, within what we make, or we have to do without. So, I know there's not very much support here tonight, but I will rally other people for no more taxes, wheel or property for Blount County. We have enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in that row that likes to speak to an item on the agenda? Go on to the next row, Ms. King.
I'm Linda King with Citizens for Blount County's Future. I live in District 4. This will be a repeat for some of you because I spoke at the budget meeting last night, but I feel it's important to voice my opinion about a wheel tax. As I stated, the people have already spoken loudly on this issue. The last referendum vote was 72% against a $10 tax. The resolution sponsor is a retiree of the school system, and his wife works for the schools. This, to me, is a conflict of interest because he's attempting to get more money from the taxpayers who already support the schools, while at the same time he'd profit from raises given to educators. The co-sponsor caused the public schools to incur legal expenses during his effort to start the Hope Charter Academy. The sponsor states that people who don't own property fall through the cracks by not paying tax. What do you think an apartment owner does when he gets a property tax increase? He raises the rent, and although the renters don't have a deed, they ultimately end up paying property tax. The sponsors apparently think that teenagers who own a vehicle fall through the cracks because they don't own property, while their parents are paying for their home. So do the sponsors really think that sharing the burden means that the parents should now pay not only property tax, but also the wheel tax for the 3 or 4 cars that may exist in their household? That's double taxing. How many county employees have cars with government plates assigned to them which are driven home? Of course, they won't have to worry about a wheel tax. How much would this special election cost, and who will pay for the special election? Apparently, it would be the taxpayers because the county general fund won't be reimbursed. The wheel tax would be split between the Blount County, Maryville, and Alcoa schools. The Blount County school system has approximately 11,300 students. That's the same number that were enrolled in 2005. Since then, we've built new schools and now provide more than 20% more square feet of space. We also employ about 32% more teachers and administrative employees than we did in 2005, but with the same number of kids. Next year, we'll lose a chunk of our enrollment because of the new Clayton STEM school. Seems like we should be making some drastic school spending adjustments. Some commissioners are asking how many counties have a wheel tax. Last night, we were told that 50-some counties do, leaving approximately 40 that don't. However, why are we looking to mimic other counties when it costs more of the taxpayers? While we don't mimic counties that charge their employees for insurance and benefits, instead ours get theirs free. But then again, that would save the taxpayers money. Property tax, sales tax, wheel tax, different names, but all money out of our pocket. It's time to cut expenses and live within our revenues, not look for new ways to tax your citizens who are already burdened.
Now, Mr. Duck, you leapfrogged in front of Miss Miller.
I didn't want to climb over them again.
So are you trying to jump Miss Miller in line? All right, Miss Miller, it's your turn.
Good evening, I'm Karen Miller from District 4, and I'd like to thank the 2 previous speakers that I could not say it better than that they have expressed the concern for this wheel tax. We do not need it. We're taxed enough already. We do not need to be like Washington, D.C., which I've said over and over again for a number of years in front of this commission. We have 32% more school employees than we need. We have wasted amount of money spent in this county on the county government expenditures, and I just hope that you see the light, that we do not need a wheel tax. Taxing is not the answer. Cutting the budget is the answer. Thank you.
Mr. Duck, your turn.
Howdy, gentlemen. My name's Samuel Duck, District 3. I'm also a citizen of Maryville. I'm commenting on item number 5. First of all, I was pleasantly surprised. I don't normally come to agenda meetings, and it seems a little more of a laid-back atmosphere, not as much security. I saw one of our citizens up here talking. I consider that a plus. It's the way the city of Maryville meetings operate. Second thing, I was looking at some comparison of positions in the city of Maryville versus county trying to find waste. One thing in particular jumped out at me, although there's quite a few things, but this was kind of the gold star winner. City of Maryville has a position that's a part-time position. It handles attendance, it handles bus routes, handles purchasing of items for the cafeterias. The reason why this position's part-time is that school staff, once they retire, can't earn more than about 40% of their maximum of their last 3 years' salary, or some formula like that. So it lets that person slide in under that 40% mark, earn a little bit of supplemental income. The city of Maryville gets to pay a relatively low wage for that position, so it kind of scratches both backs. I go and look at, say, our county school system, for example. I found a coordinator of nutrition. I found a bookkeeper of nutrition. I found a supervisor of nutrition. I found a supervisor of transportation and attendance. I found a secretary of transportation and attendance. And I know there's a little over 5,000 students in Maryville, a little over 11,000 in the county, but I found it odd that we have a part-time position doing what the county's doing with 5 positions, for example. So I think we've got waste of that nature out there that needs to be looked at. I know y'all can't do it, but you can control the budget and tell our school board, look, you've got to be looking at these things and making these kind of cuts. We're not going to give you anything else until you get your house in order. Honestly, wish they'd pick up the phone to Mr. Winstead and ask him what he's doing. Our cafeterias are in the black. Now, they can't make a profit because of regulations, but at least they're not draining money. He's made some changes there. I was also looking at some of the benefits for the city employees. I'm trying to get a little bit more detail. I also want to compare them to the county. But I noticed that they pay a fair bit for their health insurance. They've also gone to the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System for their retirement benefits. And it looks like our county employees are paying a little bit less for their benefits than the city employees are. And I find it perplexing that we're asking our city employees to pay a wheel tax to pay for benefits that we're unwilling to cut in county employees while they're also paying for their own benefits as well. I'm going to run out of time, so I'll stop there. But consider these things. There's things that we could learn from our fellows in this county.
Thank you. Ms. Ball, come forward.
Good evening. It's been a while since I've been up here, and it appears that things have gone from bad to worse during that time.
State your name and the district,
District
please.
7.
Thank you.
When I look at this commission, I see an all-Republican commission. That's supposed to be limited government, smaller taxes, more personal freedom. Yet, in the first 3 years in your all's terms, there has been a proposed tax increase each year. The first year, you upped our property tax. Last year, you tried to push a sales tax on us. Now you're trying to push a wheel tax on us. And even worse than that, you want to call a special called election and waste more money 6 months after the people just voted down a tax increase? That should have been obvious. Duh. The people said no, and here we are looking at a third tax increase in 3 years. Plus, you upped fees a couple of years ago. So we're looking at what's next. Are you going to go for 4 in 3 years by upping our property taxes again? Now, there's been talk that we can't compare Blount County. I want to know why we can compare Blount County when it comes to taxes with the wheel tax, but we can't compare Blount County when it comes to spending. You all ought to be, instead of looking at a tax increase each year, how about looking at a budget reduction each year? That's what supposedly limited government is all about. Thank you.
Anybody else willing to speak? Mr. Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Travis Gardner, proud member of the
Just wait until you get to the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a proud member of the Chilhowee View community that lies in District 4. I'd like to thank you. I appreciate and I have utmost respect for this body, and I thank you for creating the opportunity to have healthy and meaningful dialogue about these important issues that our community faces. You've got an item number 5 on the agenda tonight, and I think that you've worked cooperatively and creatively to find a solution to the challenges that the community faces with funding our school systems. I would like to reinforce that the community has elected a school board to act as stewards on their behalf, stewards to immerse themselves in the issues, educate themselves on the enormous regulatory obligations that our school systems have, and invoke both constraints as well as funding requests to meet the needs of the community. They are trusting us to ensure and guarantee to them that their children are prepared and educated to represent this community years on and remain competitive so that the community does not decline with poorly educated children and the trickle-down effects that surely would lead to. thank you for listening to what I have to say, and I offer my thanks for working together to at least entertain the funding request made by the school board. Thank you.
Anybody else willing to speak? Mr. Kirby, your light is on. I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the proclamation for our Alcoa Fire Department, I'd like to add three names to that if it's possible.
All right, Mr. Kirby, let's get to the setting of the agenda first, and when we get to that item, I'll recognize you first to speak at that time. Anybody else willing to speak to items on the agenda? Seeing no other hands, we'll move forward to item C, approval of agenda committee minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting of March 5th, 2013? Motion made by Mr. Lewis, seconded by Mr. French. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote to approve the minutes from March 5th of 2013.
You have 19 yeses.
The minutes are hereby approved. Well, next, item D is setting of the agenda. Do I have a motion to set the agenda? Motion made by Mr. French. Do I have a second? Second. Take a second by Mr. Fultz. Any discussion of items on the agenda? Mr. Carver, you're recognized, sir.
I would like to pull G8 from the agenda meeting, please.
G8. Pulling item G8.
Request from Chilhowee Baptist Association.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Carver?
That's all.
Mr. Lael, you're recognized.
Thank you. Item 6C, I have a question as to whether it even needs to be on the agenda, because it was my understanding that there has already been discussion. City of Maryville planners who control inside the growth boundary of this area have already rejected this. And my question would be, is it necessary for us to set a public hearing on that item since it has been rejected 7-0 by the Maryville planners?
Mr. Lael, that was an automatic forwarding to us from the Planning Commission, so I'm going to leave it on the agenda, then we can vote at the during the setting of its place on the agenda whether or not to forward it on to the main. Is that acceptable? Mr. Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add three names to the proclamation for Alcoa Fire Department.
We're still on setting the agenda, Mr. Kirby.
So you ain't got to
just give me 1 second. We're almost there too. I appreciate your criticism, Mr. Kirby. At this time, seeing no other lights, we will move to set the agenda with the removal of item G8. Please vote. Come on, Mr. Kirby, you're slow. There you go. Good job. Mr. Lael, now you're the slow poke.
You have 19 yeses.
The agenda has been set. At this time, I'll take item E1A, proclamation regarding the Alcoa Fire Department. I'll entertain a motion. Motion made by Mr. Lewis. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Kaler. At this time, any discussion? Mr. Kirby, should I call on you now, Mr. Kirby?
Thank you,
Commissioner
Mr.
Kirby,
Chairman.
you're now recognized to speak.
For the fourth time, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add three names to that proclamation.
Okay.
Tab Burkhalter, Ron French, and myself.
Those names shall be added on to Resolution 13-4-004. The names being Burkhalter, French, and Kirby. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kirby. Any other discussion? Seeing no other, Mr. Kirby, you're recognized again. At this time, please vote to forward the proclamation forward to the full commission. Mr. Herron, we need a battery, please, for Mr. Commissioner Green.
Push the bottom.
There you go.
Yeah, 19 yeses.
The motion is approved and shall be forwarded on to the full commission. At this time, item E2A, Board of Equalization appointment due to resignation of Board of Equalization member. The mayor has recommended the name of David Weaver. From my understanding, this is just an information only. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor? Very well. Next item is item E2B, allocation of space committee vacancy. Mr. Carver, I'm going to turn you on.
Thank you very much. We are still with the allocation of space. The resolution states that we should have 5 members, and we have 4 members, so we are still seeking a 5th to complete our committee. So if I could get someone to possibly volunteer to be on that, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Is there anybody that would like to serve on this very important committee? Don't everybody jump up at once. Thank you, Mr. Melton. We have a motion made by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mr. French. Any discussion? All in favor of adding Ken Melton to the Space Allocation Committee, please vote. This is a nomination.
We have 18 yeses and 1 abstain.
We shall forward the full name of Mr. Melton forward to the full commission to join the Space Allocation Committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Melton. At this time, that concludes items for the consent calendar. There is no unfinished business, therefore we'll move to item G1. I don't have any budget transfers in the packet. Is that correct, Mr. Vineyard? There are no budget transfers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very well. Item G2, budget increases. I'm showing 3 budget increases. I'll entertain a motion. For which one, Mr. Carver?
I'd like to include all 3.
Mr. Carver's made a motion to forward all 3 budget increases forward to the full commission. Do I have a second? Second made by Mr. Lael. Any discussion? Mr. Fultz, I saw you going for your light, but it didn't click. Or do you want to discuss anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have one question on this Circuit Court Clerk Judicial Commissioner. It appears we're adding a position. Is that correct?
Mr. Vineyard, can you answer that question?
The proposal is to take a current part-time position and convert it to a full-time position to give 24/7, 365-day coverage. If implemented and approved by the commission, we should actually make up this additional cost with overtime savings that we're having to pay out now.
Okay. There's a letter of agreement signed each year which specifies the total number of positions authorized in each department. Is this in addition to what was authorized, or is this in the letter of agreement?
The recommendation is to go from four full-time, 2 part-time presently to 5 full-time, 1 part-time, if I understood the request yesterday.
Okay, but there's a letter of agreement signed between the departments and the mayor each year. And my question is, how many full-time equivalent positions did it authorize, and how many, including this, would we have? And if you, I don't expect you to know that number off the top of your head, but if you could have that for the commission, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fultz. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing no other lights, please vote to forward items G, 2A, B, and C forward to the full commission.
You have 18 yeses and 1 abstain.
All 3 items shall be forwarded on to the full commission. At this time, we'll go to other budget items. Item G3, I'll entertain a motion. Motion made by Mr. Lewis. Do I have a second? Second made by Mr. Melton. Item G3 is the resolution authorizing submission of application for a litter and trash collecting grant from State of Tennessee Department of Transportation, authorizing acceptance of the grant. There has been a motion made and a second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote to forward this on to the full commission.
You have 19 yeses.
The item shall be forwarded on to the full commission. That concludes items, item G of other budget items. Next up is item G4, request regarding delinquent property tax sale. Mr. Vineyard, I really don't know exactly what this is about, so I'm going to turn on your microphone so you can explain it.
At your last commission meeting, we asked for authority, and you granted that authority to allow us, in the event properties weren't bid on at the tax sale, to enable the county to bid in those properties at the tax sale. We asked for authority to bid up to $55,500. At the commission meeting, we were asked to do some due diligence prior to making those bids so that we would not be acquiring possibly any property that had any environmental concerns related to it. We agreed to that. The report that you have behind the resolution here is very detailed as to what steps were taken and what review was made on those properties. There were 41 properties that received no bid at the tax sale. We are proposing that we actually made payment on 36 of 37 parcels in a residential area and 4 properties that were scattered around the county. Only one of those parcels did we find a concern that could be construed to be safety or environmentally related, and we did not bid on that piece of property. If you approve this resolution, the way the statute reads, the county commission has to endorse or ratify, or only the action of the county commission can enable us not to bid on an environmental concern. And that's what we're bringing to you for consideration, that you ratify our action.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vineyard. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to forward Resolution 13-04-005 forward to the full commission. Motion made by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mr. Green. Any further discussion about this item? Seeing no lights, please vote.
You have 19 yeses.
The resolution shall be forwarded on to the full commission. Next up is item G5, resolution to call a referendum on the question of whether a countywide motor vehicle tax should be levied for Blount County. I'll entertain a motion. Motion to forward to the full commission made by Mr. Lael. Do I have a second? Who's the second? Second, Mr. Melton. Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Samples, I'll recognize you.
I'd like to offer an amendment as Section 5 to this proposed question on the ballot. And I would like Section 5 to read this way. Upon passage of the wheel tax, this said tax will sunset after 5 years from the date of its inception and return to the ballot for the citizens to either approve or disapprove. If at any time during the 5-year period the additional sales tax is approved county-wide, the wheel tax would automatically sunset at the inception of the additional sales tax. This is simply so that if the citizens choose to do it, and at some point they also choose to add the additional sales tax, the wheel tax would come off. That's the bottom line of it. I would place that as an amendment.
At this time, will the maker of the motion accept that as an amendment to the resolution? No, sir. Okay. We have a motion made by Mr. Samples. Do I have a second for Mr. Samples' amendment? Second by Mr. Kirby. So right now we are having discussion only on the amendment made by Mr. Samples. Mr. Lael, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
The purpose of the whole process that began was to identify a revenue source that would impact a greater majority of citizens than just property owners. In talking to other counties who have been a part of this process, I have received information where they indicated the use of this type of levy has created an environment in which they have been able to, across time, stabilize their property taxes, pay down on their debt by focusing normal property tax income in that direction, and created a situation by which it's hard to say that any tax is a benefit, but they have benefited by being able to plan long range and do the kinds of budgeting that has become very successful for them. And these are counties who have less resources than we have here. But the main thrust that I got is everybody hates it, but they recognize the fact that it does not totally impact property owners, that it spreads the burden across the population. Now, whether you believe that or not, we are in the process of discussing that and voting it up or down. And I think the most simple resolution that can be brought before the public is, do you want it or do you not?
Mr. Lael, I hate to interrupt you this time, but that sounded to be speaking more to the main motion. Right now we're only on the sunset.
Well, actually the sunset, that is on that, because the main motion doesn't put a sunset. This is why you would not want a sunset, is that across time it would provide some stabilization. And that would be the, now that of course is how each and every one of you believe or think you believe. As a result of going in this direction, hopefully we can do the kinds of things, and this is not something you want to bring up and battle every 5 years. It's my understanding that should these other occurrences happen, 14 votes on this commission can take care of it anyway. So I don't know why you would want to put, an artificial or a sunset on it. So that would be the only discussion that I would offer.
Thank you, Mr. Lael. Mr. Samples, I don't know if I cut your button off or not. Did you want to talk to your amendment?
The only reason that I put this on here is so that if we determine that it is not needed, it will sunset. If the sales tax is approved county-wide at some point in the next 5 years, I don't see the reason to have both taxes on there. That's my reasoning. Now, I mean, it's up to you.
It's up to 11 people here.
Thank you, Mr. Samples. Mr. French, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, and my first question is because it's going to address my second question concerning the amendment. What amount of dollars will the wheel tax raise for the county? How many vehicles do we have in the county? I mean,
I'm gonna try to get Mr. Vineyard, see if he has any further information about that.
If I'm taking too much liberty with the information, Mr. Clerk, you can correct me. If we assume 120,000 vehicles and the proposed rate is $35 per vehicle, that's a gross take of about 4.2 million.
Okay.
Per year. That has to be distributed on an ADA basis. Blount County schools would get roughly 2.5 million.
I think that answered my question, because I understand if the sales tax, and I was going for the amendment, I asked the question, if the sales tax would pass sometime in the 5 years, it's going to be about equal to what the county would get from the wheel tax, apparently. Now, we have to split that. Do we have to split the sales tax too, right? And we'll be getting, I think, was it about 2.3, I believe?
That's the number I heard.
So my question was, if we,
2.4.
yeah, my question was going to be, would the sunset clause just make up the difference is what I was looking at. And apparently there's not going to be any difference. So they're both going to be equal amounts. That's what I need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. French. Mr. Hasty, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question on this amendment, while I can appreciate something having a sunset clause, I guess what I'm looking at is if this goes in, what kind of revenue will we need to start it up? I'm assuming it would be stickers on cars. There would be something we'd have to spend. Now, if it's sunset, how much money would we, say in the first year, throw away, and then here we revert back? I would rather see something, I guess, maybe if it regarded a time and period of never going up. But I guess my question first for this amendment would be, does anybody know of what cost that it would cost us that we would be money spent and out of when, if it was to sunset before?
Mr. Vineyard, I'm going to ask a question, but I think from your head nod, the answer is you don't have that information with you.
That's correct, I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes, do you have any other questions you'd like for Mr. Vineyard to get for us by next meeting?
On this amendment, I got a question, but it's not to the amendment.
Very well. Mr. Farmer, you're now then recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things on the amendment. One, it's more than sunset. What was stated is a lot more than the sunset. There's several other stipulations that you have read into that forego sunset. My understanding on the sales tax also was that it would be around 1.2 million, unless I misunderstood that a few months ago, is what we would capitalize out of that. So it's a far cry different. But by setting a sunset, we're tying the hands of this body in the future. You're setting something up that is already set to be acted upon. And if it were to pass, and yet it were still needed, it's gone, you have to go back and do it all over again. We should never tie the future hands of this body. If the sales tax does come up and is passed, at that point in time, 14 votes, and the wheel tax is gone. And to me, to set a sunset like this with a half a dozen different stipulations, we're actually confusing the issue. honestly, leave it as simple as we can possibly leave it. If in the future this body sees they don't need it, then they can put forth a resolution and cancel it.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Mr. Carver, you're recognized.
My question is when could the sales tax revenue be readdressed, and when could we actually pull in revenue from that? What's the time frame? Does anybody know that answer?
Mr. French, I'll recognize you.
I went and talked with Miss Breeding last week, and that specific question was the reason I went to talk to her. TCA 67-6-706 states that you can have a referendum within 6 months of each other. You can call for the referendum before your 6-month time period is up, but you cannot hold the referendum until 6 months is passed. And the other question, well, that just answers your question, and that's what Ms. Breeding told me last week.
Mr. Carver, do you have any other comments or questions?
I guess I am kind of curious, even if we did vote on it, when could the revenue come in? Would there be a time frame, 2015? I'm just kind of curious if that was the case. Would there be a time frame between that?
Mr. Reed, do you know the answer to that question? I'll take the shaking of the head as a no, as a negatory response on that one. Is that? Mr. Lael?
Yes, sir. Thank you. It's my understanding that should the sales tax become voted upon, and with the subsequent certifying of that vote and so forth, the first revenue would be estimated to come in the year 2015. I cannot absolutely verify that, but that is the understanding that I have gathered as I have talked to different officials.
Thank you, Mr. Lael. Ms. Birchfield, you're recognized.
Does anyone know the cost if we do the referendum? What is that going to cost the county?
All right.
And she said that it was going to cost $90,000 to hold the referendum. That's what she told me. I know you're frowning and you don't believe it. That's what she told me, folks. She told me it was $90,000 to hold a referendum.
All right. Mr. Farmer, or actually, Mr. Farmer?
That's not the number that she forwarded to the chairman for a special call election on June 11th. As she told you, that's something we'll need to get in writing if we forward this on to the full commission, because that is not the number that was repeated to us.
Just as a point of clarification, I was under the impression that was closer to like $32,000 for a special call election. That's what I believe she put into her budget request for next year for a special call election for the city of Maryville. So anyway, Mr. Foltz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot of discussion here about sometime in the future this commission could vote to rescind the wheel tax. Can anybody give me an example of, on any occasion, when this commission voted to rescind the tax? I didn't think so. Thank you.
Seeing no other lights at this time, please vote on the amendment to add language for section 5. I did not get the full language. Thank you, Mr. Samples. If it's okay with everybody, I'm not going to read his full amendment, but it's in gist to sunset after 5 years or to be voted upon by the voters to be reinstated for another 5 years and to immediately sunset upon the sales tax. So please vote yes to accept the amendment to the main motion. Vote no to not accept the amendment to the main motion.
We have 9 yeses, 9 noes, 1 abstain.
The motion fails due to a lack of majority. Therefore, we are back to the main motion as to whether to forward on to the full commission the resolution for the calling of a special election. At this time, I will take any discussion on the main motion. Mr. French, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if we're spending this money needlessly for another referendum. 3 years ago, it did not pass. And don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking against the wheel tax, but I am speaking against a referendum for the wheel tax, because why do we need to spend money on a referendum that didn't pass 3 years ago? Mr. Lael brought up something in a comment a while ago that we can pass a wheel tax with a 14 vote. And I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I just think that's something we need to look at.
As a point of clarification, this body can pass a wheel tax by 2 consecutive votes of 14 commissioners without it going forward for a full referendum vote to the voters. Mr. Fultz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to what you just said, that's true, but I also read the statute, and if a sufficient number of names are generated on a petition, the citizens can force a referendum on the wheel tax. So just because this commission votes it, it doesn't make it cut and dry. Getting back to the original motion, the proposed resolution, in my opinion, seems to put the cart way ahead of the horse here. The resolution says the need for new revenue sources is great in Blount County, unquote. That's what it says. This full commission has not spent any time discussing the budget. Without violating the Sunshine Law, which I don't want to believe my colleagues would do, how is it possible to reach the conclusion that the, quote, need for new revenue sources is great in Blount County? We don't even have an agreed upon budget. Yet some are promoting a major new tax increase to be placed on our hard-pressed citizens. This does not make any common sense. I will not vote to consider it until after we've done the hard work of coming up with a budget so we know how much money we need. We don't have an approved budget, and yet we're talking about a major tax increase. This doesn't pass the common sense test. Thank you.
Commissioner Hasty, you're recognized to speak.
I have a question, and I guess this could be directed, well, a couple of them. Somebody could help me with my answer here. I understand that the school board has asked us to look at a considerable increase in their budget. And I'm assuming since this is all would be going to the schools that that's where this comes from in a roundabout way. I guess my question is, the next year and the next year and the next year, as needs arrive, will we see this amount keep going up, or will this amount cover everything that the school says that they need currently?
Mr. Hasty, I believe the schools have asked, and Mr. Vierman can correct me if I'm wrong, for close to a $6.9 million budget increase this year. This would only generate approximately $2.4 million for the schools. Okay. So if it were to pass with the assumed numbers of 120,000 vehicles at $35, based upon those assumptions, Mr. Clerk, not get upset with me here. So no, it would not meet their budget request for this year without additional revenue sources, either allocation of more pennies to the school system or allocating other local revenue sources to the school system. Does that answer your question?
It kind of does. I guess if I was going to do something this drastic, I think I would want enough to cover the whole amount. So what you're saying is basically we're going to ask our citizens to pass a wheel tax and then turn around and hit them with a property tax. Might as well just get it all in one, I guess. But, all right, you answered my...
Mr. Hasty, are you making a motion to amend the wheel tax? Okay. Mr. Lael, you're recognized.
Again, this process began when, first of all, we met in joint session with the school board, and they made their requests and their needs as they best saw it at that point known to us. Anticipating the need for additional revenues created a thought process of trying to go again outside the normal route of property tax increase. Knowing full well that because of the process involved, there was no way for any kind of relief via the sales tax, and knowing that at that time, it was my understanding there was already a special election slated for June the 11th, which created the timeline that has put this information being placed before this committee and so forth to deal with this issue. The bottom line in there is that the possibility of increase of revenue for the schools was estimated at 38 to 40 cents, you might as well say. The process behind this is not a complete solution. It is a solution that approaches and encourages the board to look at what they're doing and maybe do some priority building in terms of what they want. However, the total thing is the people in this county will have the opportunity, should this pass, to make their wishes known. And as I've heard the discussion, I've heard folks saying, okay, sales tax, property tax, we're throwing all of these things out there. This is a direct method of trying to meet the obligation of, and we are charged with helping to fund the school system. This is a way to spread that responsibility across the entire population, not just property owners. And should it pass or not pass is in the hands of the people who are voters. Now, to add all kinds of innuendos and all kinds of different pathways and so forth. It really does not address what we're looking at here. Do we want to put this in the hands of the people to make a decision? And if you will recall, it was not a year ago or 2 years ago. It was in 2008 when the other wheel tax was proposed, and at that time it was purely for roads only. It had nothing to do with schools. And in my way of thinking, what better way to do it than to come up with a possible solution that includes, as decision makers, the entire population, voting population of this county. And should they decide to do this, it equates on a car to less than 1 gallon of gas a month. And should there suddenly be school closings that were proposed, should there be buses that wouldn't run, you know, the general population of folks picking up kids and so forth would spend more than that on each day that those situations occurred. Now, without belaboring the issue, it is my hope that this commission will put this decision into the hands of the voters and let them look at it. It is a different time than it was 5 years ago. It is a different set of needs than it was 5 years ago. And this at least does not go to the same well, that being property owners, which, by the way, seems to be a diminishing group of folks. So we're asking them to assume more burden in operating this county, because in my community alone, there are 3 or 4 major apartment complexes, all of which have a whole group of cars parked out in front of them. You can make your assumption based on what you see there. And to that end, this will be my final comment, unless somebody's got a specific question. So this committee can put this question and make their decision whether to put it on or not, and then let the full commission make their decision, and then ultimately, should it pass, then the citizens will get their input. For that time, they will be the commission. They will be the budget committee. They will be the decision makers in this county. And as I have determined from the many comments I've gotten in the last week or so, there are many different sets of opinions. There, and this allows each of those to make that decision on their own as best they feel they can afford, or in the best interest of their own conscience and what they believe in. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Mr. Fulch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're hearing lots of discussion about getting what boils down to $2.4 million to the schools. And to listen to this discussion, you would think the only way to do that is to raise taxes. We could cut some budgets, and not the school budget necessarily. There are a lot of other budgets that could be cut in this county, and we haven't even had that discussion. This commission hasn't spent 1 minute on that discussion, the full commission. And we need to have it, because until we have it, we don't have a budget. And we don't know how much money we need, how much revenue we need. So the whole idea of talking about a major tax increase without having had the other discussion, it's just stupid. Thank you.
Mr. Kaler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to briefly expand on what Commissioner Lael said. First and foremost, I don't want a wheel tax. I'll be honest with you. I don't want a wheel tax. I don't want a sales tax. I don't want a property tax increase. But the point is that there's got to be some money raised somewhere. Okay. With that said, as an elected official, I think that it's my responsibility and our responsibility to listen to the people. What better way is there to listen to the people than to let the people make the vote? I don't think that it is my right or my responsibility to say, Blount County, I'm not even going to give you an opportunity to vote on this. I don't think that's my role. I think my role is to offer them the ultimate ability to have a say in the way money is spent in this county and the way money is generated in this county, is to let them tell us. If they say they want a wheel tax, so be it, and if they don't, at least they had that opportunity.
Seeing no other, Mr. French, sorry.
With all respect to the comments that have been made, we gave them the opportunity 3 years ago, and they spoke. Well, I believe it was 3 years, but, pardon? 4 years ago, sorry. 2008, I believe it was. But anyway, we gave them the opportunity, and most of us here, but we're on the commission at that time. And if we're not going to listen to them back then, or when they spoke 3, 4, 5 years ago, I can't understand why we're going to go ahead and spend the money to put it on a referendum. That's my only question. We've got to find some revenue. I'm not saying we have to do it all by taxes, but I think we can meet a happy medium with the school system. They may have to cut some more, and I know they don't want to hear me say this, but it may have to be a happy medium between cuts and a tax increase. I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel.
Mr. Kaler, you're recognized.
I don't want to appear argumentative with my fellow Commissioner French, but I wasn't here 5 years ago, okay? I don't know what they did 5 years ago, and to be honest with you, I don't care. What I care about is the circumstances that are presenting themselves here today in this county. I don't care if we have to ask them every year. If we have to ask the taxpayers every year to have their opinion, their vote into how we raise money, then so be it.
Ms. Merle, you're recognized.
There's been both sides presented here, and I'm not saying I'm for it or not, but I am for always hearing the people. So I would be for a referendum to see what they say. But a very good point has been made up. We have not discussed the budget. I feel like we're putting a dollar amount. There's a very specific dollar amount in there that may or may not meet our needs. We don't know that yet. At least I don't. I haven't really seen anything that discusses that. We've met with the school board, and they have some serious needs. This only addresses that. I don't know what the timeline is. If this referendum is in June, do we still have some time where we can figure out what if we need $35.50? I mean, or what if our real need after we look through budget cuts is $27? I think we should look at that and maybe make this decision next month and still be able to do it in June, but I don't know that. So I guess that's my question. What is our time frame on this?
Our time frame for doing a referendum is it has to be voted, it has to be forwarded by April the 18th, approved by the full commission on April the 18th, because in order to have it for the special referendum vote on June the 11th, it has to be signed by the mayor, the chairman, and the clerk by Friday morning, April the 19th, to be given to the election commission at their 10 o'clock a.m. meeting on, I think it's 10 o'clock, don't hold me to that, but to their April 19th meeting to give them the resolution so they can forward it to Nashville for approval to be on the June 11th. If we vote in May, it cannot go on to a vote for a June 11th. By having it in June before the year starts in July, then we are able to add that into the budget process. Your question as to if the money is not, if it comes in only needs 27 cents, this is allocated going directly to the schools. And Mr. Vineyard can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I believe what we fund the schools on is based upon local dollars, where we have to maintain a BEP for local dollars. So if this guaranteed source with the wheel tax and the sales tax goes to the schools, we have what we have to fund them through BEP. We can reduce down the penny that we allocate to them if they don't need that. We can take that penny elsewhere. If they need additional funding, we can allocate more pennies to them. Is that a very simplistic version, Mr. Vineyard? I'll take the head nod as a yes. Any other, Mr. Mayor, do you want to? Ms. Merrill, did that answer your question? Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
I think the only difference in what the comment that you just made was if we reallocate a penny or two, that does not involve split dollars. Is that correct? Whereas if we do implement a wheel tax, it's definitely split dollars.
Everything that we do locally is subject to split dollars. So the penny is going to be subject to split dollars, the sales tax is subject to split dollars, and the wheel tax is subject to split dollars. The only difference is that the sales tax by law goes to the schools, and the wheel tax by this referendum goes to the schools. So the only thing left at the disposal of the commission for meeting maintenance of efforts is the property tax, the allocation of other funds that we have that come into the county that we allocate to the schools. Those are the only thing left at the discretion of this body.
Okay, then let's go back that if we didn't put the issue on a wheel tax on until May, if we didn't have that discussion until May, all we've done is postpone another 1 month of receiving that revenue. Is that accurate?
No, we've killed it.
Okay.
Mr. Vineyard, you know the answer to that question?
We can't hear. I didn't hear what it said.
The question was that if it does not get voted on until July or September of 2013, the comment was we can't include it in the budget that's passed this June because we don't have it in place yet. So if we were to come in after the fact, it'd be new income, but we could not put it in to the budget that we passed by June 30th of this year.
There is an option, however, though, you could do a continuing budget. Until such time as you make a decision. We could do a continuing budget.
I mean, when the commission adopts it, as long as it's in accordance with state law, is what you're bound by.
Yes.
Well, and the only reason I bring that up is because what the school board brought to the commission was a full $6.9 million addition. And we asked them to reconsider that amount, and the school board came back and said, no, it's going to take $6.9 million in additional revenues. Anything we're talking about now doesn't satisfy that. So if the schools have said it's 6.9 or nothing, and we do something in between, and they've said we can't do that, it's $6.9 million, what have we accomplished? That's the only question I have. Even if a wheel tax is put in front of the voters, even if the voters approved it, if we haven't solved the problem for the school system, what good have we done? Unless the school system comes back and says, well, we can do with less, and here's what it looks like. We haven't seen any of that. So it's more of an opinion point of discussion than it is anything else.
Mr. Samples?
I think Mr. Lewis said what I was going to say. I'm just concerned that the 2.4 million, and I'm saying it the same thing, just in a different way. What if that doesn't meet the need? Where are we then? I guess is my question. And I don't have an answer to that. And as Mr. Foltz correctly pointed out, the Budget Committee has not even begun to talk about massaging the budget or making cuts or making changes or moving money around. We don't know where we are. And what we do have, as Mr. Lewis correctly pointed out from the school board, is it's this or nothing. We don't have anything in between. And as near as I can tell, there's $4.5 million in between 2.4 and 6.9. Is that arithmetic right, Mr. Farner?
Mr. Hasty, you're recognized.
I just wanted to say I do agree with Mr. Kaler in having our citizens on an issue like this, and I have no problem with that. I think Mike said what I butchered up, what I was trying to say. If enough is not enough, I mean, I would feel more comfortable if we had an exact. But I do agree, this is something that our citizens will hear their voice, and I guess for the second time, I will support it, but at the same time, I do not, I guess, if it's voted down, are we prepared to stand behind that to the school board?
Mr. Kirby, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about a special election, $90,000 down to $30-something thousand. And also we're hearing rumors that City of Maryville is going to have their election. Is this on the same dates? Is that what we're trying to work for? Has City of Maryville approached the Election Commission to have their special election on their half-cent sales tax?
Mr. Kirby, I don't know that part. I just know that there had been discussion of having a special election on June 11th. I don't know who all was involved in that. And that was the date that Ms. Breeding had given to us as the date for a special election. I don't know if the City of Maryville has forwarded anything to them to have a special election. I don't know that information. And we can ask that information of Ms. Breeding for the full commission meeting if that's what you'd like.
I'd like for sure to know if this is going to happen, and if it is, and there's going to be an election, and we should let the people decide this on that date if they are going to be a special election on that date. If the City of Maryville is going to call for a set election, they want that half-cent sales tax.
Mr. Melton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to use round numbers. I don't remember exactly. Last year we funded the school $79 million, some odd. Am I right? Okay. They had to use how much in fund balance to take it up to 81, right? I believe I'm right on these figures. Is that right? May I ask him, Mr. Chairman? Or Troy? Troy, come up here. Let's get Troy up here a minute.
Mr. Logan, can you come forward, please?
Okay, Troy.
Mr. Viner, are you okay if we direct these questions to Mr. Logan?
Please proceed.
Okay, Troy, you understand what I said?
I do.
We funded 79 something last year. Is that right?
Our current budget is 82.6 million.
I know it is. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
And 3.6 of that was use of fund balance. So 79 million is the difference. Yes, sir.
That's what we funded last year. Then y'all took what, 3 million? I thought it was two something.
3.6.
3.6. So even the 2.2 that it's going to bring in, it still won't bring us up to what you got last year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's the way I look at this election or referendum that we're going to put forth. Maybe it will help them to come up and bring them up some dollars, which they used out of fund balance last year, that we can help them get to close to where they were last year. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melton. Mr. French?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify on one point. I think some of my fellow commissioners have misunderstood me. I'm not against a referendum letting the people vote. I'm not against that. I think the people ought to vote. I think y'all misunderstood what I said. What I said was, by not listening to the last referendum, we're going to do it again. What's going to happen now? I'm just throwing it out for discussion. What's going to happen, and what are you prepared to take? What actions we need if it doesn't pass? That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. French. Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Just one last comment regarding the referendum. I'd certainly agree that it's the voter's option and that we need to put it out there. I would much rather see it happen once the school board has told us how much money that they can live with, so that when the voter goes out there to vote, they know that once they've done it, that it fixes the problem. At this point in time, you're asking the voters to go put in a fee that they don't know, and we can't tell them whether or not it solves the school issues. The school board hasn't told us whether that solves their issues as well.
At this time, the board is clear. No one's reaching for their buttons. I'm calling discussion closed. Please vote to forward this onto the full commission.
You have 15 yeses, 4 noes.
The motion shall be forwarded onto the full commission for discussion. Next item is item 6, setting of public hearings. Before I go down these, we have normally only had one public meeting or one public hearing per meeting. We are getting to the point where we are having several requests come in. I set these in conversation with Ms. Pitts as to trying to give each person the opportunity to be able to speak on each specific item, so that way they have a designated time to show up if they wanted to address the public hearing on their item. So that's the reason why we broke them up into 15-minute increments. This body can choose if you all want them all to be set at one time, where they're all stair-stacked on top of each other, 5 minutes apart, 3 minutes apart, an hour apart. As Mr. Foltz alluded to earlier, there's a sunshine law, so I can't call you and ask you what you all want. So please let's have a discussion right now as to when we have multiple requests for public hearings, do you want them spaced 15 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart, 10 minutes apart, or just decide at the night of, or decide on a case-by-case situation? Mr. Lewis?
Simply because we don't know how much each item might take. If we allot the full time to all of those, and it allows us to get to them as they are in the order they're presented. So that would be my suggestion.
Put them all at the same time.
Put them all at the same time.
Okay. Mr. French, all right, so what I'm assuming I have from Mr. Lewis is a motion. What time, Mr. Lewis, would you like to set all 4 Or what time would you like to set? Would you want it to be at 5:30, 5:45, or do you want it to be at 6:30? Traditionally, Mr. Lewis, we set them at the same time as the beginning of our public meeting tonight at 6:30. So what I will do then is I will entertain a motion for 6A to set the resolution to amend the zoning map of Blount County from suburbanizing to commercial for property located at 225 and 235 South Old Glory Road, being tax map 056 parcel 045 and 045.02, to be set for May 7th, 2013 at 6:30 p.m. Do I have a motion? Motion made by Mr. Lewis, seconded by Mr. Carver. I didn't include all four. Do you want?
I'm saying, can we include all four?
My motion would be to include all four at that same time.
Can we pull item C and do it separately?
It'll be done separately as a part of each.
No, but he wants to pull. He wants to discuss item C separately. Okay, so we have a motion made by Mr. Lewis and seconded by Mr. Carver. Mr. Lewis, do you accept item 6A, 6B, and 6C for all being set at 6:30 p.m. on May 7th? A, B, and D. Sorry about that. Mr. Carver, do you accept? Yes, Mr. Farmer.
The agenda meeting is set to start, Mr. Chairman.
It is, but we've always set we've always set one public hearing at the start time of our agenda meeting. So that's why I was asking Mr. Lewis earlier if he want.
I would say 6 o'clock.
Well, that's my point. I would say 6 o'clock. If you're going to have four of them to set it at that time, we're not going to get the agenda meeting started till 7 o'clock.
Are you acceptable with amending that motion, Mr. Lewis, to 6 o'clock? Mr. Carver? Yes. So we'll set item 6A, 6B, and 6D for 6 p.m. on May 7th for public hearing. Mr. Lewis, you're lit. Do you still have any more discussion?
No, that's good.
Seeing no other discussion, please vote to move forward to the full commission 6A, 6B, and 6D for a public hearing for May 7th, 2013 at 6 p.m. Mr. Harrison's not here, so
There are 18 yeses.
at this time, I'll entertain a motion for the three shall be forwarded on to the full commission. At this time, we'll entertain item 6C. Do I have a motion? Motion made by Mr. Kirby. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Wright. Mr. Lell, you are recognized.
Yes, sir. This particular parcel has already been reviewed by the Maryville Planning Commission. They have jurisdiction, I believe, through the urban growth boundary, and they have rejected this change by a vote of 7-0. And my question would be whether or not we even need to have this move on or be considered. And Mr. Lamb is here. May I ask Mr. Lamb to step forward and give his opinion?
Mr. Lamb, could you come and impart some wisdom onto us about this issue? Or you can have Mr. Logan do it, since he enjoys the microphone.
The only requirement by state law is that you refer it to a planning commission to get their recommendation. Your vote on this would be independent. So if you wish to carry it forward, you can carry it forward and hold a public hearing. So you have to have a recommendation from the Planning Commission. You have to hold a public hearing before you can take a vote to approve it. Okay? If you want to kill it now, you can kill it now.
Well, my question is, since it has already been rejected by Maryville Planning and it's in the growth boundary, what's the point of moving it? Is there a point? Is what happens if they disapprove it and we approve it? Where does it fall at that point?
You're the legislative body, they are not. This is a legislative action. They can only make a recommendation, and they have done so. You're free now to take a vote on it.
Okay. Another question. Prior to any land, lot, etc., moving from one designation, in this case suburbanizing to commercial, at what point are letters sent to adjacent landowners and so forth, notifying them of that?
The public, if you set a public hearing for that, that sets in the motion the requirement to notify surrounding property owners.
Well, that answers a question, because otherwise there had been only one notification, a sign placed in the yard that it would, be coming under consideration, and I was not sure when that process kicked into play. And I thank you for that. So what you're saying is that the question is not rendered moot at this point by their decision.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Lael?
I would ask that, using their Maryville Planning's advisement, that this be dropped from the public hearing list and not move on.
Any other comments, Mr. Lael?
I'm sorry?
Any other comments?
Not unless I get a second and need to.
No, we already have a motion on the floor to forward it. We have a second. So you've spoken out against it. Mr. French, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will second his addendum to that motion if that's what he's doing. But also, I wonder if I could get Mr. Lamb back up to the microphone for just a minute.
Mr. Lamb is taking part in the physical activity program of walking to the furthest seat in the back to come back forward again. Come on up here, Mr. Lamb. I didn't even turn the microphone off for you. Well, we might not call you again, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lamb, I took part in this discussion on the Planning Commission with this piece of property, and I had some problems with it. Well, my understanding, there are a couple of pieces of properties that are next to this piece of property that have been zoned commercial. This piece of property is on Keith Road, am I correct?
As I understand, it does have access off of Keith Road.
Off of Keith Road and Keith Road only? Best I remember the map?
Best I remember the map, too.
Yes.
Keep in mind, I did not handle that one.
Oh, I understand. The map also, the two pieces of property that were zoned commercial also, while they did have frontage on Keith Road, they also had frontage on William Blount Road. Is that correct?
To my recollection, that is correct.
And in our general policy, when we are creating a commercial piece of property, do we not try to, I guess, try to keep the commercial pieces along a major arterial road or a collector road, we try to keep them where the access to the piece of property is going to be off of a major thoroughfare, if you want to call them major?
It does not state anything about direct access. Okay. It does state about orientation, and for the short distance along Keith Road, the orientation still is predominantly towards the arterial.
Okay. Well, my problem with this piece of property is it just fronts Keith Road, which is I don't know what it's classified as.
It's a local road.
A local road, which I feel shouldn't handle the traffic of a commercial zone, the way I look at it. But that's just me. But I want to second Mr. Lael's addendum if that's what he's done.
All right, just for point of clarification, the motion is to forward. There's a second on that. I don't think Mr. Lael ever officially moved to amend the motion to change it to not to forward. So when we go to vote, if you want it to be forwarded to the full commission, you'll vote yes. If you want it to die and not be forwarded, you'll vote no. Mr. Kirby, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on the Planning Commission. In all streets like William Blount Highway, City of Maryville and most cities are requiring an access road to be run along the road. So you'll have one access onto a main road, and then you access the other businesses off of this access, the other road. Well, Keith Road fits that criteria. Keith Road is already servicing 2 commercial pieces of property that cannot be accessed off of William Blount Drive. This piece of property, all I'm saying is this man is due process for his piece of property. He's requested to be changed from suburbanized apartments and duplexes to a piece of commercial property, 1 acre of property. And that road in front of his property is being used to access 2 commercial pieces of property that cannot be accessed off of William Blount Drive. And that's where the question is about the road. It's a county road that's being used to access commercial property, which is all over this county that way. So that's all I want, is this man to have due process for his piece of property to be either voted commercial or be voted down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Mr. Harrison, you're recognized.
Yes. I'm on the Planning Commission also and was in on that, and it came from the Planning Commission with the recommendation of approval. And I just want to indicate we need to look back at what our committees are sending this to us and give them some due diligence. And this needs to, we need to look, this come from our planning, recommended what to do. And the reason was being that is just that it needs to be the same for everybody. And there's due diligence, and this is why it came from the Planning Commission like that, and this is why I would recommend that it go forward like that.
Mr. Lael, you're recognized.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Attending that meeting, the vote was 6-5. There was a lot of confusion expressed during the meeting. There were a lot of folks who were given the information that Keith Road was a commercial road, which it is not. There were a lot of information that was not very clear. The map itself that was presented was barely discernible, and I don't think that there was a adequate study of this. Now, I'm going to say it out loud. This is part of my family farm that we're involved with. This family farm surrounds this 1 acre. The total impact of that is that 1 acre, which sits on the opposite side of the road of any of the commercial that's along that road, will define a 60-acre plot behind it. It was said that, and I understand due process, and that's what we're doing, is due process. It is my contention that that is part of Blount County's vision of maintaining some green space, and that's the only intent. It was said, you'll like it, it will be commercial to make it more valuable. I don't want it to be commercial. It is no more than what it is, a family farm. And that one section out of 60 will define it. Now, again, I will admit to having some emotional attachment because that's where I grew up, and I know that everybody else here understands that too, who's had, you know, that kind of situation. There is no compelling reason to make it commercial because it is not on a commercial road. It is next to a commercial road, but it is not on that road. And there is an access that is being utilized by one business that I know of. I don't know where the two commercial businesses are. There's only one there, and it's a storage facility. The other residents of that road have indicated that they think it's in their best interest that it not be, and that was why my question of the letter notifying that there was a possible change, because they weren't, notified. I wasn't notified. If I hadn't driven by and saw the sign, I wouldn't have known it. So anyway, my question is, are we really, after taking under advisement the fact that city planners who basically have control via the growth boundary have said no to that lot being commercial, why are we considering it? It should remain suburbanizing, in my opinion. And, you know, I will hush and the vote can go on.
Mr. Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. Most of you know I served on the Planning Commission for numerous years, probably as long as anyone. This being in the urban growth boundary, this body still has control over how it's zoned. We do go off the recommendations furnished by the cities in the urban growth boundary. And as Mr. Lamb said, it is a recommendation. However, as far as due process, they are receiving due process right now. Regardless how the vote goes, they're receiving their due process.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Mr. Lamb, do you know why the city of Maryville rejected?
I was not at the meeting. I can't speak to that.
That's a different map than they used in the meeting.
I can't tell anything from this map.
It's still a different map.
Mr. Lewis, any other questions? You're still lit up, so we know that the map is terrible according to public comments, so are you still, do you have any other questions?
No, I know two things. I know Mr. Lamb doesn't know the answer to that question, and this is a terrible map.
All right, Mr. Helton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a question for Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lamb, does the entire parcel of the property set within the 500-foot setback?
I didn't measure it, but I think it does. But the 500-foot setback is not a policy within the urban growth boundary. That is only a kind of an informal policy in the rural area for the rural arterial commercial.
Okay. So it can go back as far as it wants?
Well, we have quite a few that go back more than 500 feet in the urban growth boundary under our jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Harrison, you're recognized.
When I looked at this, I just wanted to look at it in a fair manner. And on that road, across from that, there was already property that had been zoned commercial. So I was looking at it from the point that if you're going to do for one, you can't not do for another. It's got to be the same for everybody. And that's, I don't want to get into being different for one of our members. I mean, the rules just need to be the same for everybody. And and this is the way it's coming from the planning, and that's what I recommend, and that's what I'll stick behind.
Mr. Melton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call a question, please.
Call the previous question. If you are in favor of forwarding this on to the full commission, please vote yes. If you are in favor of killing it here and now, please vote no. Mr. Wright?
You have 12 yeses, 7 noes.
It shall be forwarded on to the full commission for the setting of a public hearing at 6 p.m. on May 7th, 2013. Next is item G7, amendments to employee handbook. I'll entertain a motion. Motion second by Mr. French. Motion made by Mr. Farmer. Any discussion? One discussion. Mr. Fultz, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a request that we be given a redlined copy of that. The copy we had didn't show the changes, and I'd like a copy that shows exactly what the changes were. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fultz. Seeing no other discussion, please vote to forward this employee manual forward to the full commission for approval. Mr. Harrison?
Yeses.
The employee handbook and the amendments should be forwarded on to the full commission. G8 has been pulled. Item G9, resolution to establish an ad hoc committee to study the reestablishment of Laurel Lake. Motion made to table G9 by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mr. Lael. Any discussion? Mr. Wright, you are recognized. I'm sorry about that. That is correct. There is no discussion on a motion to table. The motion has been made, so please vote to table this or vote no to not to table. Everybody understand what we're voting on? The motion has been made to table G9 indefinitely, and it has been seconded. If you want to discuss G9, then you have to vote no, not to table. If you want to stay on the table, then you vote yes. Mr. Harrison?
You have 12 yeses and 7 noes.
Motion to table passes. It shall be tabled. That concludes our items of of new business. Next is public input of items not on the agenda. Mr. Wright, do you mind if we let the public speak first and then come back to you? Any items of public input of items not on the agenda? Seeing no hands, Mr. Wright, it's your turn. I'll turn you on.
I would like to know why we are tabling this particular committee. I would like some valid reasons, because we've done a lot of research and we have all of our legislators has been doing work on this, and I would like to know why we are tabling this. Can someone tell me?
An input on items not on the agenda. A motion was made to table it, and it passed. I'll leave it at that.
Mr. French, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I would like to formally request that we ask Ms. Breeding, our election supervisor, to come to the full commission meeting next week. I also would like to ask if we could get a clearer map on item G6C in the packet before next week. I'd also like to announce that there's a education committee meeting Thursday at 12 noon at Wallen School. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other announcements are, I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis, you are lit, I'm sorry, did not check the board.
Just one request, and that if we can come to some kind of a consensus on how many vehicles we have, so that we know what the implication of a wheel tax would be.
Mr. Cook, you think you can help us out with that one? All right, Mr. Lewis, that will be worked on. Mr. Fultz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to request that the assessor be present at the commission meeting. We have a whole bunch of parcels here that are being zoned, upgraded to commercial, and I'd like him to tell us what the tax policy is going to be on those parcels.
Okay, Mr. Fultz. The only other comments that I have is the ad hoc committee to study solid waste and recycling will meet in this room at Thursday, April 11th at 5:30 p.m. The Lost Revenue Committee will meet in this room on Tuesday, April 30th at 5:30 p.m. And the commission meeting will be April 18th, 2013 at 7 p.m. in this room. Seeing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.